Very much. I'll try and keep this one lively as we've had such a very nice lunch. Thank you. And sorry for those that have heard me at almost every one of these, but I found it so useful in being able to come and sound different ideas, sense check what we're doing, finding better ways of doing things when I've gone back and then rethought about it. So I'm giving it another go this time, so thank you for your patience. And we've been chipping away with our head gardeners and our garden staff. Some of them have been really good and they've started doing their accessions and things like that. Others less so, but we're working on them. We're having a big discussion about how we can do our tree records, and we've had some changes at a senior level, which now means that they're wanting to see some of the things that we might be able to provide them, so that's work in progress. But I've always wanted to get the historic record onto where our current records are, so that they're there for use. And so I'm going to take you through some work that I supported a couple of my colleagues in doing. So just a quick reminder of why English Heritage are doing plant records, possibly similar to why you're doing, but they might be a little different. We're not so focused on the Botanic Garden side of things, but I hope one day that all of our record keeping will unlock kind of some early accessions, some early plantings, which are always going to be of kind of wild source and things like that. And there will be a botanic and a scientific value to them. But at the moment it's mainly a historic record, and those historic records are just as valuable, if not more significant, than perhaps what we've got growing in our garden now, particularly if they've been replacements. I showed this slide before, and the thing that I'm looking at is how do we get from books to here as quickly as possible. And so the records aren't just sat on the shelf gathering dust and not being used. So English Heritage have around 14 garden sites. We have 400 plus collections, so whenever we change a collection we've got a nice long list. But we're also covering, for just our gardens, 500 years of history. So for Kenilworth Castle it might be that someone was writing about Queen Elizabeth I's visit and growing in the garden with cherries and strawberries and this and the other. So that's important information. It's just a little snippet, but actually if we make sure that that's still in our consciousness today, it helps us manage the garden, a recreation of the garden, as best we can. We've also got Down House. So this is from Charles Darwin's movement of plants. This is circumnutation of Cyclamen persicum. So again, we know he had Cyclamen persicum in the garden. Yes, he was experimenting on them, but again, valuable information if we're trying to recreate his experiment. But the bulk of the work and the bulk of the example is from Belsay Hall, where we had two gentlemen, Sir Charles Monk and Sir Arthur Middleton, grandfather and grandson, who appeared to go round their garden writing down lists of plants, which is fantastic. Some of them are in quite good detail. Did they not know what the species of fuchsia was? Who knows? But actually this is a wonderful resource that's been in a record office for years and no one's looked at until my excellent colleague Emily, who's a garden historian, she's our landscape advisor, started going through and starting transcribing these so that we're ready to represent the garden in a few years' time if we get the money, authentically as we can. On the north side of the West Steps, there was a Cotoneaster microphylla. We could go and plant that one back if it's not already there, or still there. We've even got a planting date. And this goes on for pages and pages and pages, and I'm glad that I wasn't having to do the transcription. But we had an intern, Jaskrit, and she wrote a wonderful paper. I've only got one copy, but if you want to kind of pass that one round. She was a historic England work experience person between her degree and I think she's now doing a master's, and she spent 6 weeks with us doing some more transcription, but also working out with me how we could get this data into the database. So I thought I'd better just show you a few pictures of Belsay Hall to kind of get in our minds what the garden is. So we have a wonderful rhododendron garden. The hall and its terraces, a close up, but it's world renowned for its quarry garden. So the hall and the castle, which we'll see in a minute, were basically carved out of the landscape, and then in the excavated quarry they started planting rhododendrons and all sorts of interesting plants. But it has varied over time, and we've got a few photographs. So this is the door in the East Quarry, and we've got a similar shot from about 110 years ago-ish. Another one from about 100 years ago. So we can already see quite a lot of changes that have been captured by on film, but is also captured in those lists of plants. And I think this is the third one in the 1940s, and again quite dramatically different. You go through the remainder of the quarry, and you suddenly come across the castle. Now, of course, the castle was there. So Belsay is just north of Newcastle in northeast England, within a stone's throw of Scotland. All of the manor estates at that time basically had a castle to defend themselves. This one I don't think was ever attacked, it's just become a ruin over the years. And then you go back to the other quarry, and we're starting to lose track of why we're here, so we've got to go back to the plant records and keep ourselves honest. So this is the list of the terrace. The east end we've got a filaria, those sorts of things. And this is how the terraces look today. And actually going round with the list in hand doesn't really tie up. And much of this is the result of plantings about 20 years ago as a restoration project, but no one had gone to look at the original diaries because no one knew that they existed. So I want to make sure that now we know they exist, we don't forget about them or its contents. So Emily started a mammoth spreadsheet that Jascript kind of inherited. So in here we've got all sorts of taxon level information, accession items, introduction, you name it, is in there. And to kind of cut a long story short, but maybe getting ahead of ourselves, I think we imported this in various formats about 6 times. Some of those we could have condensed, but I wasn't so sure on hitting a button that says 500 entries suddenly get imported. So we took it slowly. But it took quite a lot of effort to get there. Quite a few panic calls to Havard and emails. What do we do with this? Can this happen? Because I originally thought, well, just put the reports in as a library item. They're there as a reference. It's useful. And so we did that, and that was the easy bit. I do worry over time that we might lose sight of, if we know what we're searching for, we can find it. But once we do this for more and more sites, maybe it'll get a bit buried again, and maybe looking at ways in which we can search or filter on the site might help. But at least it's in there, and at least if you click the button, you'll get the transcript and you can search through it. And then I thought, well, we'll just accession some of those names, and we'll enter the names into the database. And then I found this big can of worms, because it started raising more questions than I certainly had answers for. And that's where kind of talking to Havard and talking to Alison in the National Trust, because she's facing some of the same things as I've got in the UK. We came up with the thought of creating a new item type called research. So all of our historical information will go into research, because then that would allow us to have different statuses, it would allow us to have different locations and things like that, and give us a bit more flexibility. But it would also mean that if you're searching for a plant, and I'll show you one of those later, actually we get the historic information and we get the current live information and things like that all on the same screen. But we can also filter it if we need to. So this seemed to be the way. If anybody's got great ideas, let me know. We can tweak this as well, let me know. But it's a start, and I'll go through in what we did. So this was our current list, or some of our current list of all of our garden locations for Belsay Hall. And we've been quite strict in the way we've sorted this out. It is available across all of the item types, so you can use one of these in research. But I'm thinking now actually we might just use it for our current plantings, because I thought, well, if we knew where the terraces, the east part, it's a round bed, it's been there, it's commented that things were in this round bed in the historic record. If I start putting it in here, maybe in 100 years someone will say, well, Christopher's got it wrong, or the data's become a bit mixed up. So I'm not so sure myself of what to do. At the moment we can pick our locations, our modern locations and the historic locations. So we had one top level which was Botanic Garden, which all the modern locations are under. So we created ourselves another one, just called it historic, and we've limited it to item type research so that it's easier when we're entering data, and it doesn't pollute if we're doing modern accessions. We can't suddenly pick a historic location by mistake. And then we started building on from there. We had two approaches that we were thinking about. The first was to think, well, we knew Charles Monk was there at certain dates. We know that Arthur Middleton, different people have had their different layers and their different time periods. Maybe we should kind of time slice it by that. With a lot of discussion with Emily and Jasprit, we decided we'd just stick to the kind of the major centuries to begin with. It gives us a bit more flexibility. And then we built the locations by simply following the diary and taking a virtual walk around the garden. So when they mentioned the steps or the pasture ground or whatever, or the 24 yards long hedge, which was 4 to 5 feet, and all of that, we've put that in there to duplicate, so we can always go back to the original records. We've only put a few coordinates, and I was hoping we'd be able to put a few more in, but the more that we did, the more I started to get worried that it looks like we're being really quite specific when we get to the map, because we've got a dot. And that might look like actually it was here rather than it was here. So one day we might get round to using ArcGIS to draw ourselves a new base map and draw some polygons, or maybe one day we're able to draw polygons to give us that kind of hedge our bets that when it says the croquet lawn, it wasn't in the centre, it was all of it. Luckily it looks quite nice on the map that relates to the time when Charles Monk was there. And just for completeness, and because it looks quite beautiful from the air, we've got Belsae Hall, Castle and Gardens. We found tasks to be really useful. So all of these diaries, they're containing lists of plants that relate to each other. But if we didn't create a task, they'd get a bit kind of separated in the database. So for each diary, we've created a different task. And we then decided we want to list all of the taxa that we knew were growing from the diaries. So this is our taxon task. We started using some of the old names so that it tied back to the diary, and Wellingtonia is always my favourite because it relates to Walmer Castle. I might have mentioned this before, it's my normal go-to example. But then we would update the taxonomy, and we have a whole load of work to do on the taxonomy. So don't look too carefully at this, but where we tried to use our name sources and things like that, so where we've known names have come in for the first time, we've done that. This is one of the diaries from 1926, put in by Jasprit, so she's indelibly in our database forever. We've got a type called research, so we know again how this has been compiled. And we've got our Wellingtonias down here. Just the 4 of them for searching. Because we knew that this related to a diary that was written on a certain date by a certain person, we tried to bring that information in as well. And where we've got some typos, some different names, if it's just a kind of a slip of the pen, or maybe somebody transcribing an E and an I, we haven't created a new name record, but we've captured how it was actually written in the diary. And we've got a few of those, and I think I've got 4 examples from 4 different names going in. This is the case. And then we've used our references to attach a reference back to the original transcript. and also because we've created our tasks, again, we can easily get back to that list to see what's comparable. So that was 6 weeks' work. There was probably a week at the end with an awful lot of heavy lifting with lots of spreadsheets. Jazzgrit had done an awful lot of deduplicating, a lot of cleaning up of the data. As we continued, we still found more. But the last few days, we then were able to start using the data. And this was just a simple search on Magnolia that I thought I'd try. There is one current record, and then we've got 12 others, if not more, of what was grown historically. So, at the first instance, we think, well, actually, we've got to be growing some more magnolias. Where were the magnolias growing in the garden? We can go back to the original records, and we can start picking from our list, and the head gardeners can bring up that list and start selecting the magnolias that we should be growing. So actually, the first thing they should be doing is definitely more than one magnolia at the moment at Belsay. So there's a data issue here that we actually haven't gone round and captured all of the magnolias so far. And how close am I to the bell?
2 minutes. Oh,
it's all right, I think I've only got one slide left.
what?
I've only got one slide left.
That's good.
And this is the result of Jazzgrit's hard work. Well, all of it's the result of Jazzgrit's hard work, but the last page in her report, she started looking at dates of introduction, so we started capturing that for as many taxa as we can, and then looking at key dates that relate to our site. So for Belsay, 1852, I think, was when Charles Mark started getting interested. We've looked at the dates of introduction, and actually we've got some very early plantings that we never really knew. We guessed at some of them, but we certainly didn't get to this list. And then we've got nice ones like, when did Cedrus deodara come into the UK? We either got it 4 years before it was generally known, or maybe it's 20 years later. So again, we've got some more interesting things to do and research, because we've got the plant names there, searchable, usable, indexable. And I think that is my last slide. Thank you very much. Any questions?
I was wondering about, I guess we have a lot of old, not modern names in those diaries. How do you translate those into the current name?
So we because they were trees and shrubs, our kind of go-to was a book called Beans, Trees and Shrubs, and some of the older additions to those. So we went to the oldest one, started looking through, and then kept working forwards.
It's manual work.
Yes. Some of that is online, so searching has helped with that. It's electronic. The harder thing we've got is we've done all of the scientific, the botanic names, but we've got a lot of common names, some of which are relatively easy, but some of them we don't know. And we did have a few that we're just not sure about. So we actually have accessioned something just called Douglasii as a name, because we don't actually know what it related to.
And how do you register that in the system? I guess.
So we create a new taxon,
Okay.
called it Douglasii, said that it came from trees and shrubs, do not use for anything else. But for its historic value, it was important that we captured that. I think we did then start going through our ABs and our Picea and all of those sorts of things. Thank you very much.
Thank you.